Muchas gracias a Correos. Y ahora, sin más, pasamos al segundo de nuestros ponentes, Steven Walden, por favor.
Oops. Whoa. That's a good start.
Yes, maybe you can put on the pockets, maybe.
Put that in there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steven. Steven Walden es director de Customer Experience de Ericsson. Thank you for coming. Steve es uno de los grandes expertos europeos en experiencia de cliente, investigador, consultor, conferenciante y autor de artículos y espacios aparecidos en numerosos medios como Forbes, Brand Strategy, Market Research, Impact Magazine. Ha trabajado en experiencia de cliente en la última década, primero como vicepresidente de consultoría e innovación creativa en Beyond Philosophy y en la actualidad desde su actual puesto en Ericsson. Thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you. Should take the. I better make sure I can work this. Coming from a technology company, I should be able to work this. Yeah, there we go. Good. Okay. That was great by John, by the way. I thought it was very informative. And what an amazing audience. I mean, I don't know. We said there was about 400 people here. I'm not too sure whether we're just about that. Roughly 400. Now, I've been to conferences in the UK, companies like IQPC that do specifically for the telcos industry, and we kind of get maybe, if we're lucky, 100. So, you know, this is a fantastic result. And I have to say, I apologize for my lack of Spanish, but I've just learned a word, hola, so... What I'm going to talk about is a little different from what John's spoken about. So I'm going to look specifically about how to measure customer experience. So I'll interweave it with a few examples from companies, but this is deep diving into some of the technicalities about customer experience. And I'd like to start, first of all, by saying I did a little paper a while ago looking at what is this thing called customer experience, because there's a guy in Ericsson called Frank Vanu who went to a conference, Mobile World Congress, and he walked through, and it was all about technology, technology, technology. Now, I have no problem with technology, because I wouldn't be in Ericsson, and I'd probably be fired if I did. But I think I would treat it as an enabler, and pull this back a little bit. Always remember, customer experience is about the customer. It sounds pretty stupid, sounds pretty obvious, but when you get deep dive into your customer experience programs and your customer experience strategy, and you're faced with innumerable vendors coming to you with customer experience wonder pills to sell to you, sometimes the customer can be lost in all that blah, blah, blah. And I want to pull this back a little bit to say, just let's start from the baseline about, let's talk about what customer experience is. Gartner had 14 different definitions of customer experience. So that shows you that you can get confused if you don't have a clear understanding of what it is. And any measurement, understanding what customer experience means, well, you have to know it before you can measure it. You have to have a clear definition of what it is before you go out there and demonstrate your returns on investment in customer experience. But demonstrate what we should do in terms of designing a great customer experience. If we don't know what it is, then we're going to be shooting all over the place. Any measure, and I'm sure there's lots of insights people here, any measure needs to demonstrate validity, we know what it is, and reliability. When we consistently measure it, we're measuring the same thing. If we're going to measure your height, we want to measure your height, not your weight. So, what I did was try to look a little bit about the origins of customer experience. Where does this thing come from? And if you haven't already, I'd demonstrate reading the paper by Joe Pine, Welcome to the Experience Economy. I think it was 1997, so one of the earliest papers on customer experience. If you go to Wikipedia, customer experience management, the financial and economic underpinnings of it come from The Experience Economy, a book by Joe Pine. And he talks about companies staging experience when they engage customers in a personal and memorable way, i.e. it is personal to the customer. Experiences create a distinct economic offering. It's not just about the goods you sell. It's not just about the services. You're creating something new, exciting, something that attracts customers to you. And that last point is often missed. Now, I just didn't want to leave it at Pine and Gilmore, because that was a little unfair. So I had a look at some other definitions. We've seen the Forrester one, how customers perceive their interactions with your company. I think that might be slightly out of date, because I think John had a little bit more on that one. But also Gartner, likewise, talk about customers' perceptions and related feelings. Now, Jorge mentioned this important point about feelings and emotions. I see it on the brand logo up there, the symbol of the heart. What we're all coming around to, even if there's variance and variations in how people understand customer experience, it's all inside the customer. It's all about the subjective, okay? So, that outside-in approach about the customer first should be your starting point when you measure and understand what customer experience means. So, just a little bit on the economics of that. You may have seen this again. The important point is the last point. As businesses and industries increasingly become commoditized and you get less margin on a commodity good, you move to providing a service, and then you move to an experience. Customer experience, the economics of it, is the value of time well spent. You're engaging the consumer in your brand. You're bringing them into your brand so that they want to spend time with you. And often this is the opposite of efficiency. Customer effort score, you may have heard about, for me at least, is about efficiency. For me, that's maybe a part of customer experience, but it's not the real gig. The real gig is getting that emotional engagement with your brand so people want to spend time with you. It feels more personal and memorable to the customer. Therefore, loyalty gains accrue. So, before I give a few examples, the direction I'm going to go down with this is, so hopefully now you've seen where the validity is. So if you're not measuring, or customer, personal and memorable experiences are not on your agenda, they must be, otherwise you're not measuring customer experience. If you engage in design, what's your output? Customers say greater things about you. I'd like to think about measurement in this way. When you leave this conference, when you go back to your families, what are you going to say? Are you going to say, this was an 8.7 out of 10 conference? It was a 5 out of, that guy, Steven Walden, that was about 5 out of 0.3. He obviously had knocked up his slides overnight. Is that what you're going to say? Of course not. I'm going to say, when I arrived, you know, I'm going to mention Jorge's jokes over dinner. I'm going to mention maybe Temkin's Donald Duck voice. These are the things I'm going to share. These are the memorable moments that are meaningful to me. That, for me, is the measure of customer experience, the stories, okay? It's not a number, it's the stories. So, I don't have a problem with numbers, and we come to that later, but you have to understand what's the narrative. How are customers talking about you? What's their word of mouth? What stories are they sharing themselves, with their family, friends, and so on and so forth? Because that is the personal and memorable moment that is meaningful to the customer. So for me, if you're not measuring, if you're not looking at stories, I would question whether you're doing customer experience effectively. Okay? Some of you may be doing NPS recommendation, some of you doing customer effort score, some of you may be doing customer satisfaction. Again, I don't want to be shot here and say they're rubbish. I don't mean that at all. They're good directionally, they give you advice, they're good thermometers, stakes in the ground of where you are. But what's important is their actionability, and you only get that granularity of action by understanding the detail. You understand the detail by understanding stories. How are people talking about you? So let's talk about some great customer experience stories. We've heard John talk about some, and I think Alan is going to talk maybe about some more. I don't want to lead your presentation, but the Seattle Pike Place. Now, the throw the fish. Who's heard of throw the fish story? Possibly. You go there, they were, I'm going to probably tell the story wrong now, but they were kind of collapsing in the 1980s. They didn't know what to do. How can we attract customers to our experience of buying fish in a fish market? That's where they created that personal and memorable moment of throwing the fish. Every time you buy a fish in Pike Place, they throw the fish. And I remember that moment just as much as I remember the Donald Duck moment with Temkin. Okay? Obviously, the fish is more positive. So that's the kind of thing. You're trying to create engagement, and that's coming increasingly into the vernacular of customer experience now. We're trying to create engagement with customers, so they want to spend more time with you. I'll repeat that, they want to spend more time with you. Geek Squad. How many people have heard Geek Squad? A few? Yeah, sorry to use American examples there. They're a little bit out of date now, but they're reasonable ones. Fry's new, I'll tell you that one. Geek Squad, how can they create that level of personal and memorable moment so people start talking about them more? They are in IT and computer maintenance, a very boring profession, not memorable at all. You do your job, it's transactional, and you go. That's it. They wanted to create that engagement. They wanted to create people phoning them up again, wanting to spend time with them. How do they do that? Of course, they have to do the stellar job of mending computers, but what they also do to create that engagement was to dress like geeks. They go to the door and say, "Hi, we're Geek Squad." You can see that from Mission Complete. They dress like geeks, they look like geeks, they act like geeks. It's all a piece of theatre, which is the classic customer experience way. Creating design, as what John was saying earlier, design through theatre in these specific examples. Fry is an interesting example of one which is done by observation. Fry, do you have Fry in Spain? Fry frozen yogurt. Perhaps it hasn't come here yet. The Fry frozen yogurt, they're in competition, they thought, with ice cream. Okay? So, all their C-suite executives considered, let's message the brand about how we are better than ice cream. Fry frozen yogurt, all the benefits over ice cream. What was observed, and I will give some names of companies, a company here was called Innovation Bubble, what they did was they observed the behavior of customers in their environment, how they used Fry frozen yogurt. And they found that they were kind of like holding it like this, close to their clothes, kind of like buying it away to show it off. People weren't saying it was a fashion item, but you observed it. People were using it as a fashion item. And on that observation, they went to the executives at Fry and say, "You're doing this wrong. You shouldn't sell the product features of Fry frozen yogurt over ice cream. You should sell it as a fashion item." That's a very brave thing to say, but what it meant, after they were thrown out the door and then ordered to come back in again, was a complete change of strategy. They started to put Fry frozen yogurt next to fashion retailers, Topshop in particular. That caused an uplift in sales of 40%, because what they were observing was how customers use the product, and that's a very important thing. Okay? And that observation, maybe one or two observations, can actually change the market strategy of an organization, because they suddenly see, aha, we can take this in a different way. All these are about the value of time spent. You want to spend time with the product. You want a personal and memorable engagement with the product. Zappos is another one. This is about getting people to engage again. So I'll just read like this. Unlike most websites, Zappos, perhaps I pronounced it wrong, I guess everybody knows this, prominently displays a toll-free customer service phone number. No limits on call times. It's not a question of average handling time. The resulting sessions occasionally resembled protracted talk therapy. On July the 5th, a 22-year-old customer loyalty team member named Brittany Brown, who'd been with the company for a little more than a year, took a call that was a record 5 hours, 25 minutes, and 31 seconds long from a woman on the East Coast interested in Masai barefoot technology shoes. What's the point of that? Take away average handling time, but it isn't just about completing the transaction in the most, getting it right first time. It's more than that. It's giving free license to customer reps to ensure that people feel that engagement. So, 4 examples all speak to the same point. Personal and memorable to me, and it's about feeling that engagement. That's the validity of customer experience. So, it's about perception. Can be a little bit conflated with service excellence. So, the sort of like throw the fish, that's one way, getting to people to feel the customer wow, but also just doing a really good job is often the way that people talk about customer experience. May or may not include technology. And critically, although not mutually exclusively, if people come into you say, it's about OPEX reduction, it's about managing the sales funnel, certainly that is a key component, but it's not the only component of customer experience. Now, I work in the telecoms industry, and so often, because they're used to this language, how much can we save by doing customer experience? What's the OPEX reduction? I think if you're only doing that, I would question whether you are doing customer experience effectively, because you're missing out on what it is: personal, memorable, and engagement with the customer. Okay. I like to wrap it up in sort of like a firm account. You've got the customer account on one side. We're increasing the value add to the customer by service excellence or customer wow, which delivers to the firm eventually euros, dollars, sterling. And also another term which I'm going to interweave into this presentation. I'm not using the term loyalty so much as I'm using the term resilience. If you can measure the way people are talking about your brand, it makes you more resilient to change. So you start to notice the little sort of negative stories coming out that you should maneuver your strategy and change to more positive stories. Example of this, Tesco's in the UK, stellar brand, fantastic experience for their market. A few years ago, is now in trouble. I would argue because they were less resilient, because their focus was away from the customer, because they didn't understand how things were changing in the way people were talking about Tesco's as a brand. So you need another measurement principle. We're talking about validity. You also need to be able to up the curve and be able to respond and continuously measure how customers are talking about your brand to get those firm advantages in terms of euros, dollars, and pounds. So with that, hopefully now you can see and when we're talking about measuring the customer experience, the unit of measurement is the customer. It's their subjective experience of your brand. Now, I'm trying not to go too, I don't know what the Spanish word is, but too airy-fairy, and I'll leave the translators to work that one out with you. But the key difference between a unit of measurement of the customer in their head, how they respond subjectively, that's very different from treating customers like they were a machine. Objective, people like to speak about root cause, push your foot on the accelerator and the car goes forward. That's subjective, that's root cause data. Your radiator has a leak. You put the screwdriver in, you mend it. That's root cause data. When you're dealing with customer experience and your unit of measurement is the customer, how they think and how they feel, and understanding their subjective experience, their perception, as we've seen in those definitions, that's very different. It's all like culture. There's lots of interlocking things. Let's think about going down to the car showroom. You've got the look and feel of the showroom. You've got the way the car salesperson speaks to you. You've got the price, of course. You've got what your partner who's with you says about the car dealership. There's so many interlocking things that eventually say, and I will buy this car. It's the same with culture. Think about when you have a family meal. The culture of the family sort of leads you to speak in a certain way to your partner, to your kids. But the way they speak to you also has an impact on how you will go forward with that culture. So the two are very much interlocked. It's a different form of data, okay? And I want to bring that out very, very strongly. Our unit of measurement is the customer. It's basically consumer psychology that you guys have to reach out, manage, and understand, and ask yourself the question, how best can we measure the subjective perception, emotional experience of the customer? Because it is not the same as driving a car. It's emergent. It's not root cause. Now, we struggled a little bit with this one in Ericsson. Eventually decided to take a framework from a company called Cynefin. So you can see I'm getting a little bit more technical with you, so apologies for that, but I think it's important that you take away some tools and techniques that are useful to you and some frameworks. Cynefin framework, I don't know, has anybody heard of Cynefin? Nobody? Wow, so good. It's new information for you, I'm pleased. They talk about culture, customer experience being in a complex domain, okay? So if you're mending a bicycle chain, that's simple. It's one of those problems. You don't need to analyze it. You know what to do. It's root cause. You do standard operating procedures. Done. Checklists are a great example. In operating theaters, checklists of what instruments you've used and what instruments you can make sure are not still in the body. That's an example. Checklists, mending a bicycle chain, of a simple domain. Complicated domain is where you start to use experts to engage with you, to start to understand, let me have a look at this problem and I'll tell you how to solve it because I'm an expert at this. It's kind of a dangerous thing because different experts have different opinions, but good practice is relevant there. Price elasticity is an example of a complicated issue and problem you can solve. I suggest to you, like culture, like customer experience, this exists in what's called the complex domain. And just like we spoke about the family meal, when things are complex like that, how do you measure them? How do you measure culture, for instance? And we've seen that as critical to customer experience. In that domain, you've got a network of interlocking parts. Think about the family meal again. It lacks predictability. And the best way to understand that is how things emerge through stories. Stories are the prime mechanism to understand the complex domain, how people are talking about you. There's the chaotic one, but that's pretty obvious. That's if your house catches fire, you just get out. So for us, we consider customer experience in the complex domain. It's a network. It's emergent. Tesco's didn't see that they were going to go down the tube. People start talking in different ways about you, maybe only a few %. And eventually, it swarms to be the dominant feature of how people think and feel about you. So it's a network. It's complex. Customer experience mostly is complex. So therefore, we need to measure in a different way, and we need to respond in a different way. We're talking about emotions. That's complex domain. It's difficult. It's fuzzy. What is ease of use? What is niceness? What is friendliness? What is knowledgeability? So many different forms. What is customer experience? 1,001 different touch points, even probably in this room, could count as customer experience. So we step back, we say it's complex, and we use stories, how you are talking when you get home about this conference to understand what it means. Okay. Stories, therefore, are the currency of human perception. And customer experience is about perception, therefore use stories. Stories are about homo neurans. People, the storytelling ape in anthropology is what's typically used. It's about people talk about not the best fitting pattern, but the first fitting pattern. If a tiger wasn't to walk into this room, I won't be standing here, well, definitely won't be standing here, saying, okay, what speed is it? Sure, it's a tiger. What speed is it going? I'll just run, okay? First fit, not best fit. People, when they engage in your brand experience, do not do a cost-benefit analysis of that experience. Okay? They look at the website. Does the website look good? Of course, they take into consideration price, but was the person on the phone, how do they treat me? Particularly as you get to commoditized industries, these little, seemingly little things become increasingly more important. People use heuristics, emotion, to make a decision. So, more stories like this, less stories like that, is the key KPI I would state that you need to use to measure your customer experience, to understand how people are talking about and where you should go. Increase the stories, the positive sentiment stories that people are talking about you, reduce the negative stories. And I'll give you some examples of why stories are a good way to do things. This is a sample of one, okay? So it is entirely unscientific. I asked my daughter, as I was coming to this conference, to tell a story openly about her school. What she said was, the things I like at school are mostly subjects like ICT, numeracy, spelling, arithmetic and grammar, PE, and DT, and literacy. Although I mostly like the adventure playground and lunchtime playground. Great, that's her story. That's the open first thing she remembers. If you were to ask a survey, you're liable to get a false positive. She rated 9 out of 10 for overall satisfaction. She rated buildings' cleanliness 9 out of 10. Yes, the school lessons 9 out of 10, but even rated higher, friendliness of teacher, the journey to school, 10. Playtime, which she indicated to her story was so emotionally relevant and important to her, was actually rated a 7 because it is variable. So what I'm saying is, just to give you a flavor, that if you conduct a survey without understanding the narrative, you are at risk of assuming things about human behavior that aren't actually true, and missing out those perceptual clues. They pick up emotion. We did a little exercise looking at the stories of the Xperia phone. And we found one particular type of story was the Xperia phone always goes dark. I never know whether it's on or off. It's also impossible to put that film cover on when I bought the phone and the instructions were appalling. A little story, you'd never find that detail within a survey. It's not to trash surveys, to say this gives you the actionable detail, how people are talking about the phone. These little things are called clues in customer experience. We like to call them modulators. They're sort of things that don't directly, what's the ROI on the film cover? What is that? Who knows? But they are important to color and flavor the experience, to make it more emotionally charged or less emotionally charged. That is why they must be considered. Too often, if you do driver analysis or analytics without understanding how people are talking about the experience, you get customers rating and talking about you in a very transactional way. It's the price. See a survey, was the price important to you? Yep, of course it was. See a survey, was the convenience of the store important to you? Of course it was. How about the phone going dark? People don't tend to rate it. Stories are a great way to pick up those emotional clues. Stories also take account, remember what I said about the changing environment? That how people talk varies through time when I spoke about the Tesco story and how they failed to keep up with the customer narrative. Little things like, I have a hunch. If we follow this through, this will happen. How can I give an example of that? Was Yorkie bars in the UK. They looked at the customer stories. In this particular case, it was focus group. One person said the chunkiness of the chocolate was really important to them. That created a whole new market segment. So it's a very different sort of logic. You're picking up those few innovative stories that will lead you as a brand to start doing something different. They also stories show that changing behavior, how people are categorizing themselves. Classic market segmentation may be saying, at the beach in the top left-hand corner, I don't know whether you got, around where you can see people gathering, that's the best place because it's far enough away from the bay and near enough to the changing rooms. That's our categorization of where most people would like to be, and also it's close to the restaurants. In actual fact, in the stories we may pick up, there's a group of people who are starting to be created that we identify, who are actually close to, ringed by the blue ring there, actually close to, much closer to the bay, and much further away from the restaurant. What I'm trying to say here is you can start to see patterns of behavior that you wouldn't necessarily pick up through straight survey. How people are talking and how it changes through time makes you more resilient, more agile to changing your customer experience and respond. Remember the Cynefin framework? We spoke about customer experience being in that complex domain. We spoke about being a network. We spoke about the importance of understanding emergence through measuring, monitoring, analyzing, reporting stories. What does that mean in what we do? It also means that because it is so complex, and this comes back to the concept of design, design is really critical. You only really know what the effect of, say, making the Xperia phone film cover much easier to put on, or you only know the effect of emotion clues, putting chocolates on the pillow in a hotel, when you do it. Controlled, randomized experiment is the way. Do something, see the result. I did some work with a company called Avios, which is a combination of Iberia and BA, which won the UK CEM Awards in 2013. This is exactly our point. We said, look guys, don't just depend on the survey and the analytics. Just create a design, then test it, and then you will see the result. And that is your measure when you see the result, because this is a complex environment. Example of this is that sometimes emotional clues can be low cost. Changi Airport, who was in a book by Tom Peters, gave the example in selecting the security queue, which is always the pain point in the airport experience, and giving sweets out at that moment. What's the point of that? What's the ROI at giving sweets out at that moment in the security queue? You can't really tell. You just do it. It colors, it flavors the experience. It makes people feel different about customer experience. If you're not aware of this, I would suggest you're in danger of missing out on the emotion, and missing out on the complexity of customer experience, missing out on how you can change customers' narrative about the experience by small clues. And you're in danger of just essentially looking at traditional research and doing the same old, same old. Stories, currency of human perception. We actually did this in India. It's a little bit proprietary, so I can't give too much, I'm afraid. But what we found, what's the real benefit of capturing these narratives? A little bit of detail. We went out with a tool called SenseMaker, and here we captured 1,500 narratives around Bhati in India, and just looking for making a comparison with what people were saying as against what a traditional survey said. And what we found was that by understanding narratives, we picked up some interesting things. First of all, promoters. We found that in actual fact, 15% of promoters who they themselves were targeting, actually 15% would never ever recommend the operator. 27% didn't see the difference between their network or any other network. Detractors, only 19% would never ever recommend, where you'd expect it to be higher. What we're doing is we're looking behind the number to see the real behavior. That's what we're doing. Not many recommended highly the use of services such as voice and web browsing, even though a traditional service said they were 9 out of 10. Again, people say it, they tick it in a survey. What's the real behavior here? People get a survey, they just tick it. They don't think about it. We are trying to force customers to think and give a more general, more specific relationship to their experience by forcing them to say a story about that experience. Understanding what stories say, pick up things like service means responsibility and ownership, which matters more than obtaining the actual answer. There are hidden network-sensitive groups, so you can do a lot with stories. Now, you may be sitting here thinking that may be similar to open-ended questions in surveys. It's actually not. The best way to think of this in using this tool is it's mass qualitatives quantified. We, first of all, ask openly for the story. We don't say what's the number and then the story, because that is subject. You justify your number, NPS satisfaction, with the story. We want the natural, real way people would talk to their family or friends about an experience. We then ask the customer themselves to signify why it is important. So they're self-signified. Normally you take mass volume of voice of the customer data, you churn it through an algorithm, or you take a mass volume of customer experience data, and you'd ask a researcher to look through the quals and demonstrate and deliver their own, the qual researcher's interpretation. We don't do that. We ask the customer to quantify it themselves, because there's so much about stories that are specific and personal to me that no algorithm or no researcher would be aware of. So think of this tool as mass qualitatives quantified. Quantitative tells you what is most important, limited depth, and makes assumptions. Qualitative gives you actionable meaning, think about focus groups, but lacks quantification. This method quantifies actionable meaning, gives you how the story operates today and through time, so you can be more resilient as an organization and respond and know what to do, understand customer behavior better. So that's really what I believe is important. To wrap up, understand first of all, in the mess that often you face in customer experience, always be true to what customer experience is. It's validity, personal, memorable. It's about the customer's perception. It's about the customers, how they think and how they feel. Second point, understand that in measuring customer experience, it's in that complex domain. It's often about small things that make a difference. It's not so much about root cause effect sometimes. It's not a domain where you press your foot on the accelerator and the car goes forward. There's a lot of complexity there. Third point, stories are the best way to measure and understand that complexity. and they can be quantified. And then it's up to you to respond, be resilient, and use those stories in your design. Actions before measures. You do an action, you see the result. Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you, Steven. Gracias. Ha sido un placer contar contigo hoy.